Good evening, everybody. My name is David Brashear. I'm the director of the Muscarelle Museum of Art. As many of you know, President Catherine Rhode declared this academic year, the Year of the Arts here at William & Mary, as we brought online new facilities for the departments of theater, dance, and music. We have a rich diversity of artistic explorations at William & Mary this year, and we're endeavoring to shine a spotlight on them throughout the entire academic year. There are a number of year-end events throughout the Arts Quarter, and I urge you all to please check Arts at William & Mary on the university's website to learn more about what's on the calendar in the next few weeks, just as we bring this semester to a close. We at the Muscarelle have had many events this fall, including the celebration of our 40th anniversary just before Thanksgiving, and I hope you've been able to join in some of our explorations of the visual arts this fall. I'd like to welcome you to the museum's final event of the year in our ongoing Voice of the Artist series, and tonight we welcome the artist Nell Irvin Painter. Dr. Painter is a leading historian of the United States. A graduate of Harvard, she went on to become the Edwards Professor of American History at Princeton University and is the author of 7 books and countless articles relating to the history of the American South. Her book, The History of White People, is a guide through more than 2,000 years of Western civilization, illuminating not only the invention of race, but the frequent praise of whiteness for economic, scientific, and political ends. Her biography, Sojourner Truth, A Life, a Symbol, won the nonfiction prize of the Black Caucus of the American Library Association. Dr. Painter is also the author of Southern History Across the Color Line, which moves across the divides that have compartmentalized Southern history, women's history, and African American history by focusing on relationships among men and women of different races. Throughout her career, Dr. Painter's work has been interdisciplinary. In addition to traditional courses in American history and African American studies, she taught on the social construction of gender, race, and personal beauty. Upon retiring from academia in 2005, she returned to school to earn a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Art from Rutgers University and an MFA in painting from the Rhode Island School of Design. Not an easy task. Her chronicle of that experience, Old in Art School, a memoir of starting over, was a 2018 finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. Dr. Painter, the artist, lives and works in Newark, New Jersey. Her work explores both discursive and visual meaning, and she uses both a manual and a digital process as she creates art. We invited her to participate in our exhibition 1619-2019 several years ago, and the work she submitted for the show, entitled If God Has Bestowed Beauty, was purchased by the museum for our collection. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nell Irvin Painter to the Muscarelle Museum.
Hello. Hello. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here, and I want to thank Melissa Paris, Julie Tucker, and David Brashear for letting me come here and speak to you, talk to you about my work, and show you some of it. I am speaking in your series, The Voice of the Artist, and I suspect that when you invited me to talk in this series, you didn't know how perfectly your title fit me. It fit me so perfectly that you probably will not be able to get me to sit down and stop talking. And I have somewhere, here, green button. Yes. This is the dust jacket. You are the third people to see this dust jacket. It's brand new. It's of my forthcoming collection of essays, the 23rd of April 2024 from Doubleday, and I just keep talking. So this book includes essays, that is to say, essays in words, but it also includes artwork. So there's autobiography, biography, cultural studies, whiteness, American politics, art history, and throughout my own art. And early in the book, you will see two self-portraits. This is a little fuzzy, but you get the, maybe you should buy the book and see this. And my photographer's favorite self-portrait, of me, not of him. So one topic you wanted me to talk about is what it's like to be old in art school, the title, which you mentioned, of my memoir, Old in Art School. And those of you who are in the arts, I know that you have an arts program at William and Mary, and those of you who come to the museum, you probably know how obsessed the art world is with youth. And youth dominated my two art schools, the Mason Gross School of the Arts at Rutgers and the Rhode Island School of Design. So even before I went back to art school, my friends at Princeton and all around, they'd say, oh, I hope you're going to write about it. I hope you're going to write about it. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll write about it. And one of the things I discovered in the process of being in art school, but also of writing about it, was the main thing was being old. Now, a lot of you are Americans, and you're thinking, well, if you're an American, the main thing is your race. So I'm black, so the main thing would be black in art school. Well, no, it wasn't. I'm a woman, so maybe the main thing was being female, being a woman in art school. For me, no, it wasn't. It was being old. Now, I should also tell you that I could use that word, old, because my dear mother, her second book was a memoir entitled, I Hope I Look That Good When I'm That Old. That's what people said that to her all the time. And now they say it to me. I hope I look that good when I'm that old. So the main thing was being old. And I grew up in the 20th century when the possibilities for people, for artists who were black, the possibilities for artists who were women were like this big. And now they're this big. Maybe those of you who are artists are aware of some of the impediments and the limitations, but they're nothing compared to what they were in the 20th century. Isn't that the case, sir? Isn't that the case? The artist says yes. So I experienced art school as an old person, and I realized that we don't usually talk about old people and oldness, because to be old in the United States and Western society is to be invisible if you're a woman. And you're supposed to just go away, I think, after you turn 40. And I could see especially at RISD, especially because it was professional, it was teaching us how to go out into the world and be an artist, that people could look at me and know that I was somebody on account of my body who was of no interest and had no power. And it was like they would just look away. Have any of you had that experience? Put your hand up if you have. And not even old women. Yeah, it's really something. So moving through that world in this body made Old in art school the title. Now, if you want me to read you the first bit of my memoir, Old in Art School, I can do that. It's about this big. Or I can stand and just talk to you. What do you prefer? Read. Okay. Okay. This is the prologue. And its title is, You'll Never Be an Artist. The world of the Rhode Island School of Design and the world of my former academic life rarely overlapped. But some RISD people, like my printmaking teacher, Rhonda, inhabited both worlds and didn't pretend my book didn't exist. You know the book I'm talking about? Oh, Old in Art. History of White People. Which one?
The history of white people.
Oh, yes. So not everybody was oblivious, but most were. So I was chatting with her one day in Benson Hall, which is the printmaking hall, after our printmaking class, and I seized a rare opportunity in art school to brag about my writing, to wit, my Sunday morning wonder of wonder, my book reviewed on the front page of the New York Times Book Review. Yes. Front page review. Oh, la, 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 la. Rhonda recognized this as every writer's dream. A once-in-a-lifetime, a true-to-life coup. She ran me downstairs to share my miracle with her teacher colleague, Sharon. Passing the printmaking office on our way to Sharon, we ran into teacher Henry, standing outside the doorway of his faculty office, a distraction from wonder, the reminder of a beef. Teacher Henry had given me an A-, bad graduate student grade, and called me dogged, a put-down, not an appreciation of persistence. Recognizing an insult, I had called him out over dogged. Henry's malevolent magnetic field pulled me off course. Instead of rejoicing over my amazing good fortune with Rhonda and Sharon, I resumed my fight with Henry. This was stupid of me, now I know, even though I was right and he was wrong. Henry did not back down, he doubled down. He insisted he had a right to say what he believed, what he knew to be true. You may show your work. You may have a gallery. You may sell your work. You may have collectors, but you will never be an artist. Why not? Because I lacked an essential component, some ineffable inner quality necessary to truly be an artist. I recognized Henry's logic of being as complete, unalloyed bullshit. I said, Henry, that's bullshit. I knew it was totally unprofessional of him, a teacher, to say that to me, a student. I knew that from a career of teaching, from a lifelong of knowing teacher-student relationships. I knew, as surely as I was right and he was wrong, I knew. What I felt was something as different as heart from brain. What I felt was Henry's arrow of condemnation piercing my student's psyche. He hurled an arrow, a dagger, a sharp-pointed weapon into my bullseye of a heart, where it lodged among 1,000 insinuations of doubts that, in fact, that I was not good enough. That arrow target, the assault and the wound, the target of my self-doubt shape-shifted into an Escher loop of insecurity and self-pity. Never be an artist, never good enough. Never be an artist, not good enough. Never to be an artist, not good enough. You may recognize this circle of torture. Henry cut me so deeply because part of me, while I was in graduate school, the larger part of me, wanted to be an artist in just that indescribable way. An artist finds her identity in art, does nothing but make art, and does it all the time, making work of unimaginable creativity, and an artist makes art 100% of the time. I would have loved to devote all my time to art, to pursue each inspiration to its fabulous ends. But I also didn't want to leave book promotion or writing tasks or my dear husband in New Jersey. I wished I didn't always have to cringe when the phone pretended parental emergency from the West Coast. But my parents were a part of me I could not imagine letting down. I could not abandon the rest of me, even when the rest of me overwhelmed my art. I wanted to be a better artist and make more exciting work with never-before-seen drawings and hitherto unimaginable compositions of color from the ends of the earth. Part of me wanted to be an artist without any asterisks. All of me wanted to be an artist, and yet at the same time, keep my past as a thinker and writer. But how could I be an artist when academic was so poisonous a concept in art, and while I had always been academic? The very worst thing in the world you could call someone's art was academic, meaning sterile, humorless, obscure, unattractive, old-fashioned, old. An artist art is ambiguous and ironic, possessing what teacher Roger called right nowness. I was doing my darndest for ambiguity and irony with mixed results. But right nowness? I was too old for right nowness. Teacher Donna faulted me for not being hungry enough to be an artist. I asked myself, what on earth is hungry if not moving to another state, paying a fortune in tuition, rent, and supplies, working endless hours, and being humiliated on a daily basis? What an art world funhouse of jumbled upside-down values. Donna's condemnation stung because Henry's resonated, and I was vulnerable to both. Meanwhile, my upbringing, long life's experience, and scholarship had armored me against thinking of identity, racial or gender identity, as something you are, or as academics would say, as something ontological. Knowing identity as something people performed in various ways, I was armored against racial and gender essentialism, as academics would say, of something simple and unitary. Yet here I was, falling for essentialism about artists. Henry's definition of an artist was ontological, as in to be, rather than epistemological, as in to learn, or pedagogical, as in to teach, or performative, as in to act, or even commercial, as in to have a gallery. He was saying anything can find its way into a gallery, and taste varies so widely that just about anything can find a buyer, an inexpressible something, some inward quality of being, hard to pin down and beyond the market, must therefore exist on the exciting side of the line, separating an artist from inferior beings, that is, from me. To be an artist was to be a certain kind of person that you could not become through education or practice. It was a toggle switch between either you were or you weren't. If I was never going to be an artist, my last few years were a terrible mistake, a waste of time and a great deal of money. If I lacked the essential quality of being an artist, I was condemned to failure. My defect was my seriousness, my persistence, my discipline, my goddamn hard work. In other realms, these are the foundations of resilience, a positive quality in life essential for survival. Survival, however, does not figure among the qualities of an artist. How much more attractive to go down in flames at a young age, like Jean-Michel Basquiat or Achille Gorky. I remember skinny white Matt, my skateboarder classmate at Mason Gross, who made awesomely huge, extraordinarily imaginative pieces by staying up the night before the piece was due. Totally amazing work, but hardly a routine for the decades. All the better to die young. Too late for me. So that's how it felt to become, I don't know if I ever became an artist. That's a capital A, and a capital A, artist. Now, you also wanted to know about the intersection of history and art making as it applies to my work. As it happens, my memoir, Old in Art School, contains such a chapter, one too long for me to read to you, on that very intersection between scholarship and visual art. If you put your hands on I Just Keep Talking, you will find my RISD MFA master's thesis in it, which is about that relationship, about my use of archives of documents or images that, as a historian, I must respect, that as a visual artist, I can play fast and loose with. In short, it's the difference between nonfiction and fiction, between fact and invention, between science and imagination. I'll come back to this in a moment. One facet of the intersection between history and art appears in my relation to text, that is, to writing, and it's taken me more than a decade to sort that out. In art school, my teachers didn't want me to use text. They sort of slapped my hand as a means of moving me away from discursive meaning, from discourse, and into visual meaning. And but here I have to make a confession. As I was moving into the image part of this discussion, I actually was using the wrong images. So I'm going to back up a little bit, and I'm going to show you the piece that the Muscarelle holds, If God Has Bestowed Beauty. This is the piece you have. And it's a drawing I made as an artist and scholar in residence at Yale in 2012. It's part of an investigation, a visual investigation I made on the concept of the odalisque, with a focus here on Harriet Jacobs's incidents in the life of a slave girl. And let me read you the passage that I drew upon from Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. This is Harriet Jacobs. She says, I now entered on my 15th year, a sad epoch in the life of a slave girl. My master began to whisper foul words in my ear. He peopled my young mind with unclean images. He told me I was his property, that I must be subject to his will in all things. If God has bestowed beauty upon her, that is the slave girl, it will prove her greatest curse. That which commands admiration in the white woman only hastens the degradation of the female slave. How had those years dealt with the white woman's slave sister, the little playmate of her childhood? She also was very beautiful, but the flowers and sunshine of love were not for her. She drank the cup of sin and shame and misery, whereof her persecuted race are compelled to drink. That's Harriet Jacobs. So I was writing this talk not with your image in mind, but thinking about some other work I made, actually in the same year, thinking on the same thing. It's the Black Sea composite maps, which I'll show you in a second. And number 8 is called If God Has Bestowed. So my Black Sea composite maps, here's one. Let's stop with that one for a second. This is a made-up map, you can figure. And it's called the Black Sea Composites because the sea in the middle is the Black Sea. The Black Sea is actually in the news now because, well, you see Crimea. Crimea is part of what the Russians have taken from Ukraine. And then that bit, you can see Ukraine there. These are the lands where the Odalisque, the young, vulnerable, enslaved, captive girl, come from. And so I put them all together around the Black Sea because the world's longest slave trade that we can find in history, thanks to Herodotus, was from the area of Crimea, the Black Sea, Ukraine, and Russia, through the Black Sea, Greek merchants, into the Eastern Mediterranean, where the societies were rich and could buy people. So in the United States, when we think of slave and enslavement and slave trade, we think of the Atlantic, we think of Africa, we think of Virginia. But if you step back into history and look at the millennia, you find this Black Sea slave trade. So that's why the Black Sea is important in this story. And then down in the corner here on the left, way down at the bottom, you have Turkey, Ottomans, and then coming around the bottom, you get into the American South, and that little arm sticking up toward Jamaica, you were starting to have some doubts about this map already. Sticking into Jamaica, that's where the Mississippi comes down. And then Jamaica, of course, was slave land. Puerto Rico was slave land. Somebody asked me, why does Puerto Rico have a little box around it? And what does that mean? Well, this is a story about the difference between discursive meaning, what does that mean, say, in history, and visual meaning, what does that mean in process. This little box around Puerto Rico is process, because I was putting all this together, I was sticking stuff together, and that showed in a way that the other places did not show in the process. So you can make of it what you will. So then you go around and you get up to Thailand, you get up to Haiti, you get to Ukraine and Russia, the Caucasus. The Caucasus play a big role because the reason that white people in the United States are called Caucasians has to do with this very slave trade. This is a much too long story for me to tell you now, so if you want to know, read The History of White People. And then we go around to Moldova, Romania, and Bulgaria. So these are all the areas where vulnerable young women came from. Now here you may note that up where Ukraine was, we now have the Niger River. The Dominican Republic is still there by the Gulf of Mexico. But this is what you can do in visual meaning. It doesn't have to tell the truth. It doesn't have to be a scientific representation of the actual places. Okay, let's go back. Let's leave it there. So I was thinking about this series of works rather than your work when I was talking about this, but they were made at the same time with the same thoughts going through my mind. So they really belong to the same body of work in which my former life, in which I wrote history, and my image life in which I made visual meaning come together. Now, in my new book of essays that I showed you, I Just Keep Talking, I made more art around Harriet Jacobs, as she features in some of my essays on the sexual vulnerabilities of captives and unfree women. For this book, I wanted to add some new art. It has some old art, as you saw with the self-portraits. So I was at Yaddo in 2022, and on my studio wall, I put up the drawings that I was making, thinking about the essays in the book. And not all of these made it into the book. I'll show you a couple that did. But this was my process of working back and forth between the words and the meaning and the history and the images and the visual meaning. So Harriet Jacobs is in my book. Jacobs, her dates are 1813 to 1897. She's the author of Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. She was enslaved in Edenton, North Carolina, down the coast from here, pursued by her owner for sex by the time she was 14. Her story is more complicated and also more interesting than I can tell you here, but one of the pieces that I made is her triptych, and this draws on the text from the runaway slave advertisement that her owner published in 1835. So I took pictures of it as I was drawing it. So the first one tells you what it's about, what he's looking for, and starts with this really rich reward at the time, $100 in 1835. For his girl, Harriet. And then in the next image, we get a little more information that she's about 21 years old. She's about 5'4". She's light-skinned. And then the next one, he kind of veers off into this weird, I don't know what to call it. He gets carried away with her hair. Her hair is curly, but if she combs it, it can look straight. No, what? So, but each one of these starts with $100 reward. So I repeated the $100 reward in other images from other essays. So, for instance, there's an essay in which Ralph Waldo Emerson plays a big part. Ralph Waldo Emerson has 3 of his own chapters in the history of white people. And Ralph Waldo Emerson believed in race, believed that he was a member of the superior white race, the Saxon race. If you want to know more about Emerson and his views on white race, read English Traits. It's not a well-known book because it's really embarrassing, but it's and it has a chapter in it on the superiority of people who belong to the race that he thought he belonged to. So anyway, he says in this very lofty way, a very racist comment, isn't it race, after all, that makes it possible for a few English people to dominate millions of people in India? Is it race? Is it not? He says. I'm just asking a question. And then he goes on to spew this. But you can see, I think you can see, can't you, the little $100 reward? Yeah. And I will tell you that as I was making these, I was trying them out on my Instagram people because I wasn't sure that you could see that $100 reward. So I made a picture of it and I put it on Instagram and I said, "Can you see that?" And they said, "Yeah." So there it is. So this is Ralph Waldo Emerson. And then let's test you again. The woman in the back is Harriet Jacobs. Who's the man in front? Okay, give these people a star. It is Freud, because Freud figures in one of my essays. But as you see, we still have Harriet Jacobs. And pulling together in a way that is so economical to put together the world of Harriet Jacobs and the world of Freud. I also returned to the theme of the Black Sea slave trade in a series of hand-colored lino prints. They're based on a map of the Don River in western Russia near Ukraine, that is to say, of this slave area. And the piece, which consists of images, text, images, text, images, text. I'm going to show you some of the images, and I'll sort of tell you what the text is. But the point is that there's a binding, as you saw in the Black Sea composite maps, of the geography and the thinking and the history and the actions in the slave lands. My piece with the images and the text will be in a book that's coming out from Bloomsbury just right now. I'm only one of several writers and artists in here, but I wanted you to know that this exists. And I wanted to close, no, not quite. I wanted to almost close with 4 of Swampy Land by the River Don. So these are all based, as I did in the Black Sea composite maps, on, only here it's a lino print, of reused geography to make a point. And so I have an image and then text. And the text would say, I was coming back from a very intense book tour, and I just wanted to kind of cleanse my head palette and make some I love making my lino prints. So I wanted to make some lino prints in summer, and I hand colored them. So that's the first part. And here's another one. And as I was thinking about this, and this is in the text, that these are called swampy land by the River Don. That is to say, it puts it over in Russia. But from the text that the map came from, it talks about the Cossacks raiding the steppe, S-T-E-P-P-E. Here's another one. And here's another one. There's several others. We'll just stop there. But the text ends by saying, if you think about it, Cossacks raiding the steppe, who were they? It's for peasants. They are raiding the steppe. They are going in and gathering up people to sell in that Black Sea slave trade. And when you think about, that's how it works. It's not just Cossacks who do that. Wherever you have a place, a group of warlords, like, say, Julius Caesar, who was one of the biggest slavers in the world, because when he would go into, say, Gaul and capture people, beat Vercingetorix, he would just ship all the people down to Rome and sell them and buy arms to go invade England. So the idea of warlords raiding the steppe, that is, of just descending on harmless people, rounding them up and selling them off, that's how we got the Atlantic slave trade also. And I say that as someone with a master's degree in African history. I know that is not the wonderful, glorious idea of Mama Africa, but when you think about swampy lands by the River Don and Cossacks raiding the steppe, you are entering into the unfortunate territory of human history that is slave trades. Now, you asked about my path to becoming an artist. That path begins in my childhood, when I drew all the time after my father taught me to draw. My mother taught me to read before I started school. My favorite childhood books were Winnie the Pooh, The Wizard of Oz, Ferdinand the Bull, and Howard Fast, Freedom Road. I was a lefty kid. I drew into my college years at the University of California, Berkeley. I drew a couple of covers for the Campus Humor magazine, but I didn't know how to take next steps. I come from an academic family. I knew how to write. I wrote well, and that's the way I went. I was fortunate enough to spend several years abroad during the 1960s. I did junior year abroad in France, and I lived 2 years with my parents in Ghana in the mid-1960s. I went to graduate school rather than art school in the 1960s, and I earned a PhD in history from Harvard in 1974. I still love history. My academic career became distinguished. I received tenure and promotion to an associate professorship at the University of Pennsylvania in 3 years, full professorship at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill in another 3 years, a Guggenheim, several postdocs, honorary degrees. In the early 1990s, I was intrigued by the apparent contradiction between word and image in depictions of Sojourner Truth, which resulted in, as you said, prize-winning biography, Sojourner Truth, A Life, a Symbol, first published in 1996 and will be republished in the second edition in the spring of 2024. Sojourner Truth led me to images. At first, I turned to her photographic portraits as a way to try to understand how she wanted to be seen, because Sojourner Truth did not read and write. So everything we know from her, including what she did not say, I'm not going to say it, she didn't say it, comes from other people. What did Sojourner Truth produce herself? Photographs. So that led me to images, at first as a kind of substitute for missing text, but then I discovered that I really liked images. I was very lucky to have access to the Princeton Marcon Art History Library, which is an Elysian Fields. And that led me finally to a BFA from Mason Gross and an MFA from RISD in painting. So since I got my MFA in 2011, I have been dividing my time and my attention between writing, painting, drawing, and printing. And besides your own Muscarelle Museum, my work is in the Minneapolis Institute of Art, the Smith College Museum of Art, the Zimmerle Museum of Rutgers, the Newark Museum of Art, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Collection at Yale, the Columbus Art Museum, the Hood Museum at Dartmouth College, the Pennsylvania Academy for the Fine Arts, the Historical Society of Pennsylvania, the W.E.B. Du Bois Institute of Harvard University, and the Newark Library. On the other side of my brain, I've continued to write and publish. I told you about I Just Keep Talking, which is coming out next spring. As we speak, I am working on a new book on Sojourner Truth, whose title is Sojourner Truth Was a New Yorker, and She Didn't Say That, which, like Olden Art School and I Just Keep Talking, will feature my visual art as well as my words. And I want to end with two of the truth drawings from I Just Keep Talking. And both of them are about copyright, because Sojourner Truth was a self-published author of an as told to autobiography. In my new book, you will meet Sojourner Truth, self-published author, who knew enough about publication to apply for and get her copyright. So I keep working on both sides of my brain, writing good history, drawing good history, writing words that I hope will get and keep you thinking, and making art that will hold your eyes. I want to reward both sides of your brains. Thank you.
So we do have time for a couple of questions, and Julie Tucker here has a microphone, so if you have a question, just so that everyone else can hear what you're saying, if you would mind waiting for the microphone.
Thanks, Dr. Painter. I've taught parts of History of White People. It's just a brilliant text, and it resonates really deep with my students. It's a real honor to have you here. I've been trying to think about how to ask you this question, because It rests somewhat on my interpretation, so at any point, feel free to tell me, Rio, this is wrong. So, but here's my interpretation.
Can I say, Rio, you're full of bullshit?
Yes, you absolutely can, and you would not be the first. But I'm thinking about your prologue that you read from, and I was thinking about this concept of old in art school. And, you know, as a longtime teacher, honest, unvarnished critique is important, right? We help our students grow. It comes from a place of mutual respect, comes from a place, I think, of love. But the kind of criticism that you were describing doesn't feel like that kind of unvarnished, tough love pedagogy, if you want to call it that. It feels like something different. It feels like a kind of gatekeeping. And this is the interpretive part, so if I'm wrong. But what I found myself thinking about and wanted to ask you about was the old in art school. It felt to me like those professors that you were describing were reacting to a threat, that there was something about your identity in art school that they perceived as threatening, and then attached a criticism to that was meant to eliminate that threat. And this is the part that I'm interpreting. But can you respond? Can you talk about that?
Yeah, people have said that to me. Oh, they must have known you were professor at Princeton, you had all these blah, 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 blah. And I don't think that's what it was. I think it was largely ageism. But also, remember, I was a student. I was not that good. But I worked really hard, and I got better. And I remember coming back after the summer between my first and second years at RISD, and one of my teachers looked at, you know, I put up a lot of work. He said, oh, I can't believe this is yours. How did you get so good? And I said, education and hard work. But I'll say one last thing to you, and that is I have told this story many times, and every time I tell it, somebody will say, somebody said that to me, and it really hurt. Or somebody said that to me, and I thought, yeah, he must be right, and I quit.
Thank you very much for that beautiful talk, wonderful talk.
Thank you.
In talking, I think when you were first beginning to talk about your images and your choice to go to art school, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you used the word fiction versus kind of nonfiction. So my question is, do you ever find yourself drawn to fiction in words? And what would be the non-fictional equivalent in imagery? I mean, you're basing some of your work on photographs and printed text, maps, things that we might in other contexts think of as documents, that we might think of as non-fictional. So can you imagine yourself sort of working across that space, or having the kind of freedom, I guess, a kind of freedom that you find in the visual move back into your
words?
Work? Yeah.
People have asked me that question too. And so I spent 5 years learning to be an artist, a visual artist. And I know, and people said when I first started, they said, why do you want to go, to degree programs? You got enough degrees, for heaven's sakes. And I actually tried going to the Newark Museum of Art, because at that time they had classes for non-artist or whatever. I did a pastel class with a really nice guy, and I hated the work. It was like, I want you to make this lemon, so he was just puckered. I said, shit. And I realized that I wanted to be the kind of artist that I am historian. I want to be a professional. I want to work at the highest level. I want the Muscarelle Museum to collect my work. And for that, I needed I needed the craft. I needed the education. And so I got the education. Now you talk about fiction. Fiction is another field, and I don't have it in me to get another MFA. What do you mean? I don't. But I really do enjoy writing what's called creative nonfiction. It's not fiction, but it is more than the kind of straightforward and scholarly work I did, say, in the history of white people. I could never write that book now. You had a question?
To me, it seems like the art form of collage is useful with putting disparate ideas into conversation with each other. So how do you see that, I guess, in relationship to just writing a regular text of history that doesn't afford one that type of flexibility?
And I have been thinking about that because my approach to Sojourner Truth was a New Yorker is a very collage, will be a very collage book. So Sojourner Truth, A Life, a Symbol, is organized chronologically. And Sojourner Truth was a New Yorker, has some chronology in it. So she spent the first half of her life in New York State. So there's that. The and is where she went from being a sort of religious fanatic into becoming a feminist, abolitionist, activist. And the last part, and she didn't say that, is about the relationship between the history and the art. The history being a report of what she said in Akron in 1851, taken down as she spoke, which people hate because it's in standard English. And what has come to replace that is a piece of art, a piece of journalism by a white woman journalist who inserted the refrain 4 times, "Aren't I a woman?" which never appears in the contemporaneous report. So here, the art has certainly won out over history, and I will talk about that, and I will talk about the relationship between Frances Dana Gage's art, Aren't I a Woman, which people have worked into Ain't I a Woman, presumably because it sounds more colored, and Harriet Beecher Stowe's version of Sojourner Truth, which was practically fiction. The great biographer Margaret Washington says that Harriet Beecher Stowe portrayed Sojourner Truth in blackface, which is what it was like. So, and in those sections, for instance, in Sojourner Truth was a New Yorker, you're going to learn a lot about upstate New York. I happen to spend a lot of time in the Adirondacks, but you always drive through Sojourner Truth, Ulster County, that is to say the Hudson Valley. You're going to learn about a lot of black people. So for any of you ever drive the Adirondack Northway? Okay. Do you know that in exit 26, which is Minerva, is where Solomon Northup was born? Solomon Northup of 12 Years a Slave was born off exit 26. That's the kind of thing you'll learn. And that's what you can do in creative nonfiction that, yeah. Oh, one last thing. There will be a big section called Sojourner Truth Knitter.
Thank you so much. This is a really inspiring story that you're sharing with us. I wanted to ask about the question of audience, because as an academic, you throughout your academic career and continuing through today, you're making choices about what to publish, where to publish, what to pursue in order to reach a particular audience or intervene in a particular conversation. And I'm curious as to how you would characterize the choices that you've made, the deliberate choices, like going to get a degree in art, in terms of how you make your work visible or have your work circulate in order to reach the audience or intervene in the conversation that you're seeking to intervene with your visual artistic career.
Yeah, I could answer you till the cows come home on that, but I won't. We were having a conversation earlier about the artist Faith Ringgold, who taught me a lot. And Faith Ringgold, for a long time was not appreciated. She was trivialized, she was sidelined. And she realized that she needed somebody to write about her work. And her friend Florence, still can't remember Florence's last name. Why don't you look it up for me? Florynce, probably the only one will come up. Lawyer, feminist lawyer. And Florence said to Faith, write your own damn self. And so that's what I've been doing. My work doesn't fit anywhere. I work manually and digitally. So rather than make physical collages, I make digital collages. So that's part of where you get things coming from all over the place. But so that's most of the answer. I'll give you very briefly the first answer. I was a very fortunate person. I am a very grateful person. I had the world's most wonderful parents. I have the world's most wonderful husband. I went to art school. People said, why did you go to art school? I said, because I wanted to and I could. I said, is that any way for a woman to talk? And I've always done what I wanted to. I never had to do anything to feed my babies or take care of my parents or anything like that. So I've always published, no, not always. I have 2 Penguin classics, Narrative of Sojourner Truth and Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. And I have an academic publisher at University of North Carolina Press for Southern History Across the Color Line. But all the others have been trade books. And they have been written, I hope successfully, to reach, we used to call that the informed layman. Yeah. I never hear that anymore. But the sense of, it's not a mass, I don't write mass market stuff. But I want you all who are not necessarily specialists to find my work interesting and accessible. So as a historian, here I'll stop. As a historian, I would go through a lot of research and respect it, and then tell you what you needed to know clearly, but with nuance. And I wanted you to see in my words, in my pages, what I put there. As a visual artist, and you see what you want to see.